right, I would like to call to order the May 20th meeting of the Chagrin Falls Board of Education. Mrs. Brudno, if you would please take the roll.
Mr. Rankin.
Here.
Mr. Kanziger.
Here.
Mrs. Burrows.
Here.
Mrs. Garvey.
Here.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Here.
Okay. All right, if let me try to kick on this virtual flag. Oh boy. No, I don't know if I have the flag this time. Where did it go? I don't know how to do it in this one.
I think we can imagine
We
it.
can manage without.
All right, we'll just have to play. All right, if you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United
States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you.
It's getting a little better.
Yeah, we're getting coordinated. All right, we're going to go ahead and go through board reports. Mrs. O'Toole, if you update us on the Audit Committee and Board Policy Committee.
No report for Audit Committee.
I think Ashley needs to call the roll, doesn't she?
For what?
No, we did the roll.
Oh, did we? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. No report for Audit Committee and Policy Committee. We're looking at a date the week of June 20th.
Real quick, I do want to point out for Audit Committee, we did receive our award
Correct.
from OSBA and we had no comments, which is pretty exciting. So.
It's wonderful.
Great. All right. Good job. Thank you very much. Mrs. Garvey, if you would talk us through the Business Advisory Committee and the Capital Planning Committee.
And Board Finance.
Sorry, I missed that one. Board Finance.
No problem. So there's no report for Business Advisory Committee. For the Capital Planning Committee, we have not met formally since our last board meeting, but I understand that some of the community members on the committee were given a tour of the bus garage by Chris Victor and our architect, Ryan Schmidt with TDA. Feedback from the tour was that the bus garage is a Spartan facility that creates functional challenges with only one pull-through for the buses, and one pull-through bay. Whoops, I'm sorry, I just lost my screen. And no meeting room, and also has visible maintenance needs such as rusting lintels and cracked pavement. With the current economic environment, the group advised that the bus garage project could wait for 2 to 3 years without much risk for additional costs to be incurred. As the board reviews the 5-year forecast tonight, we can think about this facility project as an expense that we will need to cover in about 3 years that is not currently in the forecast expenditure projections. With regard to the Board Finance Committee, we did meet via Zoom on Wednesday, May 13th, and we reviewed the draft updates to the 5-year forecast, as well as the impact of revenue and expenditure reductions on potential levy scenarios. The committee discussed the risks and uncertainty associated with the down economy and the coronavirus pandemic. I wanted to add that following the meeting, I had an opportunity to speak with one of the committee members who wasn't in attendance, and he wanted me to share his perspective, which is that we've assembled a great deal of expertise with regard to economic and financial parameters and being able to vet the assumptions and really think through those. But he felt we were lacking expertise in the political arena. And when we're making these decisions, a big piece of it is the timing and the amount of the levy and factors related to the economy and the upcoming presidential election, and even the fact that most people will be voting by mail, we presume, this fall. There's just a lot of uncertainty in the political arena. And he said, he knows well enough to know when he doesn't know something and to bring in an expert or somebody who knows more than he does. I thought it was a great suggestion, and we're fortunate to have someone in our community who's a parent in the district, Anthony Fosacek, who is what I would term an expert in this arena. He has helped manage several political campaigns and has worked on many levies as well. So I wanted to put forward that maybe we would bring Anthony to our next board meeting to advise the board on, you know, it's hard to project with an uncertain environment, but as best we can what the next 12 months is going to look like in the political arena, and give us some summary of information from his perspective. So I wanted to see what you guys thought about that.
I mean, I think it would be a good idea to hear from him. I think any additional information would be helpful. And I think it was an astute observation on this part of the finance committee member, because that you keep coming back to timing and amount, and there's the district financing side of things, and then there's us confused and speculating about what the political environment will look like. And I'd love to hear from an expert on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear from a political expert too.
I agree. Makes a lot of sense. I mean, we can look at the numbers, but I agree with Sharon. It seems like that's the element that we're usually guessing at, the most. I mean, there's the most uncertainty about what's going to happen politically. So no, it'd be good to certainly knows a lot more about it than I do.
Why don't we have Bob reach out to him and have a preliminary discussion and see where it goes.
There are also people out there that specialize in education levies specifically. So you could augment that presentation if the board wanted me to check the resources as well.
Yeah, if there's more resources, that'd be great from a political standpoint, from my perspective.
I thought this would possibly be a good starting place. And I did call him to see if he would be available before I mentioned it to you guys. And he is available for June 3rd. And then of course we can always follow that on with additional information if we feel like we need it. But this would at least be something that in the next couple of weeks, we can get a conversation going and figure out what additional information we still need.
Bob, the resources that you're referring to, would the district have to pay for that, or could we get some information complimentary?
I would imagine you'd get somebody on the front end, just complimentary for initial dialogue and conversation. I would have to just make a couple of phone calls. I know I've reached out to these individuals before when talking, fall versus August and trying to get stats on passage rates and things of that nature. So I just know they're available. I don't know as soon as June 3rd, but I know we could tap into that, and I can follow up and at least get some information.
Okay.
Well, it sounds like I'll go ahead and confirm with Anthony then on June 3rd, and if you guys can add him to the agenda, and then we'll just reconfirm with him, how the Zoom meeting works. And that concludes my report.
All right. Thanks very much. For records retention, we have no report there. And next, we are moving on to Superintendent's Report. So at this time, I'll turn the meeting over to Dr. Hunt for his report.
Bob, you're on mute.
Got it. Just trying to get myself organized here. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Good evening. My report has 3 items on it tonight. The first is a required public hearing regarding the 21-22 calendar for the school district. Just as a reminder, there's a process that we go through that starts with meeting with our Excel Tech Consortium. So that's 12 different schools that offer vocational program to all of our high school students. We agree on a window for a start date. We agree on a consistent spring break. And then locally, all of our schools create calendars. We create 3 options in total. I create 2. CFEA's president creates a 3rd, and we put those out to vote by all of our staff. The recommended option is the option that was selected, and this is, I guess, the time would be for any public, discussion about this or input. Certainly, if anyone has any input to go ahead and email it to me. And if the board has any input tonight, I'm happy to listen to that and take it into consideration before the final recommendation and vote comes at our next meeting.
It was helpful to have the graphic on the way the voting went. Thank you.
The only thing I will jump in here and just kind of put on the board's radar, we are talking about the start of school next year and the potential of moving that date, whether that be pushing it back to have more time for planning and getting ready, or I even saw today the University of Notre Dame schedule their bring in students earlier so they can get to Thanksgiving quicker and have a long break over Thanksgiving and winter. I'm assuming due to flu season. So not making any recommendations now. I just want you to know that that's up for consideration. Second item on the agenda or my report tonight is a request to hear publicly some conversations and work that's been ongoing in the district regarding advanced and cluster services. So I appreciate Mrs. Quinn, Director of Curriculum, being here with us tonight, and Curtis Howell as well from the Intermediate School. If you guys can walk us through these changes, and certainly if you have any questions along the way, feel free to ask. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
I am going to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen with the Advanced Gifted Cluster Services board presentation? Yes, woo! Okay, I really appreciate the opportunity for both Curtis and I to share information with you tonight about the Advanced Gifted Clusters that will be offered at the Intermediate School next year. I think through our presentation, you'll see how the development of the cluster groups really reflects our commitment to providing ongoing opportunities for students to access varied advanced gifted programs as they are ready and really maximize the potential of all students. So what is a cluster group? Basically, it's an intentionally placed grouping of advanced gifted students in an otherwise mixed or heterogeneous classroom. In our case, for English language arts, this would be advanced gifted clusters within a typical English language arts class. In our district, we reference students that meet criteria for placement in a more rigorous course, but have not yet received a gifted ID as advanced students. So that's why it's advanced/gifted. So I thought we would just briefly highlight some of the differences as to what students would receive in the advanced gifted clusters versus what students in the remainder of the class would experience. You'll see that it's very similar to what students are currently receiving in the advanced English language arts class as a whole group. They're just receiving it in a smaller group in the cluster format. So looking at the selection criteria or the data that's used to find students to place in the clusters, all of the students that are currently served in grades 4 and 5 in advanced ELA this year will seamlessly move into those clusters next year. The third graders in the advanced gifted clusters will continue on in 4th grade. The additional criteria that we added for going into next school year is the inclusion of students that are currently in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade have only a reading gifted ID, and they only have that 1 point, whereas 2 points are needed for eligibility. We felt like with the current situation and our inability to collect additional data on students through the iReady assessment in the spring or the gifted testing window in May, we hated to not be able to offer those student services. So it was a total of 10 additional students sprinkled across 4, 5, and 6 that we've notified those families. The nice thing about having the clusters within an ELA class is that throughout the school year, as students meet the data points to show readiness, they can seamlessly move into that immediately rather than having to wait until the next school year to do so. Some of the other differences, this is very similar to what currently happens in advanced English language arts classes. Those students will be experiencing some required writing contests, whereas the students in the remainder of the class, it will be an option for them to participate. Relative to the standards, students that are in an advanced gifted cluster, it will be assumed that they have mastery of below grade level standards, so they will be taught at grade level and above grade level. whereas students in the remainder of the class will be taught at grade level, but will visit above and below grade level standards as necessary. As far as addressing the social emotional needs of our gifted students, the teachers that we have, and we have so many of them, we're so lucky at the intermediate school to have their gifted endorsement. So they have an understanding of the social emotional needs of gifted students. For those teachers that don't have their gifted endorsement and haven't had an advanced group, Katie Gill, who also has her gifted endorsement, and I will be working with those teachers to get a better understanding of those students and how to meet their needs, oftentimes through use of almost like the bibliotherapy, through use of books, through discussion of the themes, through the writing assignments that you're giving. You can really effectively address some of those needs. As far as pace and content, all students that are in our English language arts classes at the intermediate school next year will be experiencing the Lucy Calkins units of study in reading and writing. All students will be experiencing that. However, there will be some differences for the advanced gifted students in the clusters, in that it will be greater depth and breadth of instruction. It might look like different books that they're reading along the same theme. If everyone's studying historical fiction, those students might be reading a different book than other students across the class. Many of the students in the clusters will have more independent reading and writing opportunities, whereas with the rest of the class, it might be more supported. As far as teacher training and preparation, all of our ELA teachers will be trained on the writing and reading workshop approach on May 22nd and May 29th, coming up here quickly. In addition to that, we will be providing the ongoing professional development for the teachers regarding gifted students and how to meet their needs. So how do we provide services within this model? As I mentioned before, all students will be experiencing the units of study. The design of a lesson usually starts with a mini lesson that could be 5 to 10 minutes in length. The classroom teacher will be providing that mini lesson to all students within the class. But then after the mini lesson, students go into the workshop, at which time some students will be working independently. The teacher can confer with individual students or can meet with groups of students. So that is the time where the teacher would be working with the cluster group students. It's pretty easy to differentiate. I think we saw that during our ELA presentation from Katie Gill, that the standards are somewhat banded. So it makes it easy to differentiate above and below a standard because they are so similar. So for example, if you were looking at a 4th grade ELA class and you were teaching a mini lesson on describing a character in a story, you could then as a teacher, when you meet with that cluster group, bump it up to the 5th grade version of the standard, which not only has you describe a character, but compare and contrast characters. So it's very seamless. It's a little bit of a bumped up expectation for students, but it still is all within the same unit of study. So why have we selected this cluster group service? As I mentioned, with the banded standards, it makes it very easy to differentiate for students, whereas with math, the content can be very different from grade level to grade level. So sometimes it's very difficult to make those stretches or leaps above grade level. What's nice about this model too is that students can seamlessly move into the cluster at any point in the school year and start receiving service. It also does not hamper our ability to balance class sizes, which is nice, that every ELA class in theory could have a cluster of advanced gifted students. So that part is nice too for all students. The cluster model is currently used in Perry schools, which is one of the districts we visited, and they use it to meet the needs of their gifted students through that cluster model. The trainer that we have for the reading and writing workshop, Christy Patriarca, is the current literacy coach in Perry. So I feel like she is very well versed in how to build the clusters, how to support the clusters and meet the needs of those students. And we're hopeful that she will work with us into our first year of implementation. The cluster model is currently used at Gurney in grades 2 and 3. So we have that experience under our belt as well. What we also plan to do for next school year, in recognition that right now, the only service we have in math at the intermediate school is the advanced math program, which moves at a significantly accelerated pace. Those students start in 4th grade and between 4th and 6th grade accomplish 4th through 8th grade math, and then go on to take algebra and geometry. Those are what we call our double accelerated students, because geometry in 8th grade, geometry is typically a 10th grade course. So we really use a lot of criteria to determine readiness for students to be in that placement, because being 2 years ahead is quite a big deal. We realize that we have a subset of students that maybe haven't shown readiness yet to be in the advanced math trajectory of courses, but still are very strong math students. And those might be the kids that would be in advanced math applications in 7th grade and would be in algebra in 8th grade, which is a single acceleration. So we thought that it might be a good idea to start forming cluster groups within our math classes, grades 4 through 6, so that we could stretch those students, provide them additional enrichment, better prepare them to go into advanced math application 7 and 7th grade. So we would like to, through next year, work with our math teachers to not only help them understand the cluster model, but also to identify the resources that they would be using with those students. And we're hopeful that we can start informally serving those students next year, and then formally in the 21-22 school year, make that an additional tier of service. So that would pick up any of our students that have a gifted ID in math, but haven't yet met the criteria to be placed in the advanced math courses. Curtis, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I was just going to say our Bridges program, in a similar way that Lucy accommodates these types of cluster groups, our Bridges program does a similar thing in allowing teachers to have time to meet with those groups of kids, whether they're low performing or they're our gifted cluster. It does a nice job of allowing them to set aside time to have that specific instruction at the level the students are performing at. It's really does well with that.
And so in thinking about that, that will be nice for students that come up from Gurney in 3rd grade and maybe aren't quite ready for the advanced math program, but are strong math students, that there would be 2 tiers of service. And it's nothing that we would have to schedule additionally for, because every grade level math class would have a cluster.
So just so I understand, would the double acceleration and single acceleration be clusters in a typical?
So unfortunately, because
double acceleration continue on its own.
Yeah. This is just providing, we kind of don't have a connection between Gurney and then the students that go into advanced math application 7 and 7th grade, because that is an advanced course that's compacting 7th and 8th grade math into a single year. And then those students take algebra in 8th grade. So we're feeling like we could do a better job of meeting the needs of those students within the grade level math class through that cluster. Does that answer your question?
Sorry, playing with my mute button. Yes, thank you. That's very helpful. So no changes for math next year. And really, it's the addition of a cluster track for the single acceleration students as opposed to, yeah, that's great. Thank you.
You know, a lot is dependent upon, we may have some new teachers to using the Bridges and math program, so they'll need to learn this summer how to use the program effectively. So walking into next school year, I don't feel like we will be ready to start serving the cluster students, but I feel like as we get into the first semester, we can be working with the teachers. If it seems like all grade levels are ready to formally, place those students in the clusters, we can do that. But I would definitely commit to, in the 21-22 school year, walking into that school year, that will be in place.
Becky, I would think that both our math and our ELA instructional coaches have a big role in this.
They're certainly helpful. I mean, all the support that we can get, we kind of all partner together to work with the teachers and provide professional development. Katie Gill also has her gifted endorsement, which is helpful in working with the cluster teachers for sure. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, they are very helpful.
Will the stretch program continue to be offered through Project Leap? Okay.
Project Lead the Way is separate that all students.
Sorry, right. The gifted students with the who qualified in the past for stretch will still have that pull out separately. Okay.
Yes, the only difference with stretch, and that was highlighted in the virtual presentation that was posted last week for families of kids going into advanced programming in grades 4, 5, 6, or just people that wanted to know more about the programming, that it will be at a common time, which will allow students to pick from all of the options that are out there, not just the options that were available at their grade level. There's only one offering middle school mock trial because it's a 6th through 8th grade program. Only our 6th graders could sign up for that. But the remainder of the offerings will be open to any of the cognitively gifted stretch students.
So I think this is terrific. I think you're adding some options, and it's great to always be able to include as many students as possible in tailoring services to them. It seems like this could affect a large group of students. And the one thing that I would just say I'd love to see us keep an eye on is whether or not there's an opportunity or a need for a cluster within a cluster, because it's not just about the accelerated pace of learning for some of these students. And as you know better than anyone, gifted students, it's just a different learning style too. They tend to answer questions with questions. And so and I hear this at the high school level too, it's great to have more students taking AP classes, but there are some students that would like to have even a cluster, an advanced AP class so that it could explore things with more depth in addition to moving at a faster pace. I just would love us to keep that open as a possibility. If you see a way to do that works within the schedules and becomes something that the students might benefit from.
I think definitely within ELA, there still is room to have groups because the teachers will still be able to do guided reading groups as well. That it's the perfect opportunity to have other groupings of students. So I think working along the same units at the same time, but having variance as to what exactly different groups of students are doing will give them the commonality that they need, that they're all talking about the same thing, but doing different things to kind of showcase that. So in getting those teacher college libraries that are on their way for teachers is going to be huge because there's such rich text that's a part of those libraries, and there's plenty of stretch. We also purchased the below benchmark libraries too for students that might be reading below grade level, but all students can be reading historical fiction at the same time, but it's just at their level, which will be great. Just to recap who will be included within the cluster group services next year, all of the students that are currently in 4th and 5th grade advanced ELA will be served in the cluster. All currently served 3rd graders that are in the advanced gifted ELA cluster will be served, and then any 3rd through 5th graders that have a gifted ID in reading will also be included as of fall 2021. And then coming soon, we have the 3rd through 5th graders that have a math ID and aren't quite eligible for the advanced math programs. We'll work on clustering those students. I think I mentioned just as far as support, Mary Kay mentioned this too, the coaches are really impactful in supporting the teachers. So we work all very closely together to provide support for them. And I will be working with the math teachers next year to kind of identify resources and help them better understand the cluster group model. And then we'll offer those math clusters formally as of the 21-22 school year. So any questions or anything you wanted to add, Curtis?
No, I would just, Sharon, to go back to your point about the clusters within the clusters, I think that's something that I've thought a lot about as we started to make this decision. And I can envision that happening in math and English language arts, especially from an ELA standpoint. Each unit has its own theme. So I think exploring those different themes and looking at student interests and how students engage in those themes can really help us to dig deeper into what students want and need. And then the same goes for the math clusters. As we start to implement those, we have a pre-test for each assessment that will show us where kids are performing, and those kids that are performing above benchmark, we can put them in a separate group and really stretch them. And I think there's nothing but opportunity with this, with both of those programs.
That's great. That's really helpful. And I want to thank you both for doing this tonight. This tends to be an area where we get a lot of parent questions, and I just wanted to make sure I really knew how this was going to play out so that I was answering them appropriately. And also, since we don't see you at meetings right now, I wanted to congratulate Curtis on his new position as the intermediate school principal. That's very exciting. And I've heard from parents who are very excited to have you there. So
thank you. I'm very humbled.
Well, if you do get any questions about any of the advanced gifted programs going into next year, the video is still posted to the website. It's 20 minutes, I think, in length, but it's a good 20 minutes.
I want to thank Curtis and Becky for being here, and certainly recognize that this is a tremendous amount of work that kind of led to these recommendations and changes, not only by both Curtis and Becky, but the entire staff as well, providing input. And yes, a lot of work ahead in terms of the implementation of these programs, but we feel very good about the direction we're taking from a gifted perspective. So unless there's any other questions, I'm going to let them jump off the call because I feel like they've probably been on 1 or 10 of these already today. So thank you very much.
No, that's great. Good job. Congratulations, Curtis.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Just want to make sure everybody hearing me okay?
Yeah.
All right, just shout if not. So I do want to, I guess, talk a little bit about reopening tonight, as there's a document circulating around and you may be getting questions about it. The Ohio Department of Education has worked with a small group of superintendents, representatives, one liaison from the governor's office, representatives from the health department, and a draft document was released for, I guess, consideration and input. And I think, we circulated that to the board. We've shared it with our administrators, and we've kind of worked through that. I attached that document to the agenda tonight in case anyone publicly kind of wanted to see what the guidelines for reopening of school might be, or at least the work and the direction it's going. Certainly appreciate the efforts, but I think unfortunately it's created a few more questions than answers, and really challenges, I think, our feasibility of returning to school in some capacity. But we certainly continue to evaluate and prepare for that return to school. I think our administrative team, we had consultant on just yesterday talking about our planning, and she commented that you're so far ahead of everyone else. So we're working really hard to come up with a model that we can bring students together in. And we kind of paused our planning and really wanted to focus on understanding what our parents and our students and our staff felt like, in this digital environment. I want to talk about that in a little bit, in a few minutes. But a couple of things, from the recommendations, if you didn't get a chance to read them, I want to bring to your attention. First of all, it does require students' temps be taken. We weren't sure if that was going to be at home or at school in terms of our requirement to, take the temp of every student on the way in. It does appear that, at least for now, that we're going to ask our parents to do that at home. It does require maintaining of social distancing, which is that 6 feet apart that you hear so much about. Obviously, this would drastically impact how many students we can bring into our building. We're striving, to be within those guidelines to hit 50%. There are certain rooms in our district that, can't handle that, gurney being a real challenge right now. So we're kind of working through, Chris has actually done some mock classrooms. We're considering moving the furniture around, taking out tables and bringing over, more desks and traditional. So we're starting those conversations. Currently, face masks are required for all students and staff, hand sanitizers, and appropriate sanitation products. And then what they refer to as frequent cleaning and disinfection after each cohort of students leave a facility or actually transition from class to class. It does require the creation of a quarantine room. So we need a room of isolation in case students exhibit symptoms while in school. And it intimates that we're going to have flexibility to remove or move to remote or blended learning. So if you have a potential outbreak in a building and classroom and you make the decision that that building can go virtual or needs to go virtual, you have that flexibility. There's a lot of legislative changes that need to kind of come and happen between now and the opening of school to make that possible. One of the things that I think is going to be, it's difficult in our environment because our community is so entwined with the schools, it prohibits visitors and guests from coming to school at all. So a couple of things, we are working on procurement. Jim and Chris are working very hard to kind of get in line for the necessary materials or get them in. And we've done it. As I mentioned, we've began kind of analyzing our classrooms in terms of our ability to house all of our students. We did notice, and I think you probably did if you glanced through the document, there's a definite lack of clarity in transportation. And really that's a major driver in what kind of model we have or will be able to implement in the fall. So we're pushing pretty hard to get some clarity on that. Right now, my hope would be to bring you a draft plan at the June 17th Board of Education meeting. The reason I'm pushing is I think it's really important that we communicate with our parents so they kind of understand what the limitations are going to be as they kind of figure out their personal lives as well, conflicts with work and childcare and things of that nature. So that's my target, but I will tell you that transportation guidance is going to be a key driver in that decision. I also want to, I did mention earlier, we're considering modifications to school calendar. So that is part of the conversation as well. I did include our survey closed last Friday that we did for students, parents, and staff. And this is not any kind of a sophisticated analysis. I asked Jen Banco and we sat down and we talked about some of the highlights. So if you click on the remote learning survey highlights, these are just some things that we pulled out. And we're really going to use these results to help drive our planning in terms of going forward. First of all, I'd point out 1,000 parents completed the survey. That's the highest response we've ever had that I can recall in terms of a survey. We had 152 of our staff complete the survey, and then about 550 of our students completed the survey as well. Just a couple of highlights when looking at results from parents. Question was, or when thinking about the fall, 58% of our parents report feeling comfortable sending their children to school as long as social distancing and other safety precautions are in place. 32% of the parents respond they prefer a blended learning environment, and 10% report not feeling comfortable sending their students to school. I highlight that because I think it demonstrates the need to create an environment that's flexible enough to handle a blended, limited, restricted return face-to-face with the potential of kids not coming at all. There's going to be a potential that, there's autoimmune issues at home. There's just parent choice regarding the current environment. So we need a model flexible enough that students can be and continue to educate from home. Another one I'd like to highlight is given the virtual learning, 52% of our parents have concerns with their ability to support instruction for their children. So that tells us we need to do a better job educating parents on how they can help, or at least sharing resources on how they can help. And then 46% of staff endorse maximizing in-person instruction, 34% endorse blended learning model, and 20% endorse a full virtual model. So that gives you some of the highlights. One of the things that's resonated since the first survey we gave was we need to provide more live stream or direct instruction to our students, and that is a big driver of the conversations that we're having and the professional development that we're creating for our staff, not only at the end of this year, but going into next year. I'm not going to read all of these to you tonight, but I think it kind of demonstrates some real key areas we need to focus on moving forward. And I would also want to point out here that there's been a tremendous effort both at home in homes across our community by the students and certainly by our staff as well to make what happened occur over the last 8 or 9 weeks. And we understand that we need to raise the bar a little bit coming into the fall, and we're committed to doing that work, certainly. So that's a lot at you regarding this. I felt it was appropriate to give you kind of an overview of where we're at and certainly answer any questions that you might have.
So are you thinking then that you were going to have, we might have the technologies where people can stream their class, like a high school class, you would be able to stream it? So kids could either be at home or in the classroom, sort of the idea?
Yeah, that's what we're pursuing right now. We think that's the
what sort of additional what additional, were you thinking of like an extra camera in the classroom, or what sort of stuff were you thinking of equipment wise?
Certainly we'll bring Mike in to, at some point to address some of this, but it's, it'd be an upgraded Chromebook for teaching staff. We'd hardwire that or wire that through our phone. So, I don't understand the technology, but for that amount of video streaming that's going on, Mike feels we need to be plugged directly in. And he's evaluating really, I think, 2 or 3 different types of cameras. We've actually had teachers come in this week and test out the different cameras, play with them to see what they like, what they don't like, so we can get a feel for what might be successful. But the end goal is a basis for our plan is to create this synchronistic environment where you can log on from where you're at home and follow along.
Right. So the camera wouldn't just be on their Chromebook, it would be out in the middle of the classroom someplace where they could sort of see what was going on the whiteboard or whatever.
There's a couple of different ways to do it. I mean, you stage it almost as a student looking out. There's a 360 camera we're looking at that's, I think, going to play out to be cost prohibitive, but yeah, that's essentially the model and kind of the basis for what we think we need to have in place.
Yeah. What about the teachers? Do they need the advanced Chromebooks if the teachers want to see the students who are remote? Would they need like an extra monitor to be able to do that so they can have what they're presenting and then see the other students? Or
I don't have that level.
Okay, you guys are still working through that.
I think when we have final recommendations, we'll certainly bring and maybe even be able to demonstrate some of it to
Bob, do you know when that like that restart document that you've shared with us, it had a lot of holes in it, a lot of blank spaces. Do you know when you expect that they'll have more guidelines and like when the transportation piece and?
I was on earlier this week and I heard that there might be guidance in transportation by the end of this week, but I don't know. Sometimes you hear things and they're very accurate and sometimes they're not. What I don't think we're going to get is very specific information. I think there's going to be a lot of questions to be handled locally and a lot of decisions we need to own and make locally as we go through this.
Yeah, I mean, just the webinars I've been involved in, I mean, every board member that I've heard has been trying to tell the state, like, we need to know sooner rather than later. You can't in August, change the plan, but I hope they have that message.
Yeah, and again, transportation, you certainly we don't take it for granted on a regular basis, but that really is going to drive everything else. If there's no other questions or comments, I'll continue to update you. And again, I hope to have some clarity by June 16th for the board. If there's no other questions, that would conclude my report.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Right now, I'll turn the floor over to Ms. Brudno for your report. Oh, you're muted. Or I guess rather than the floor.
I got it. The big message came across my screen. Okay, so we are going to start with the 5-year forecast. I'm going to try to share my screen here, and this is my first time presenting in this manner, so bear with me. All right, everybody can see that, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so first of all, as always, when we're talking about a 5-year forecast, I always have to point out that this represents what we know now, and our finances and circumstances are changing constantly, as the last couple weeks have certainly demonstrated to us. Within this forecast, we make a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of things that are not yet known. Tons of variables that go into how we estimate these numbers, and changes in those or assumptions that do not come out the way we expect can certainly change the numbers and could change the numbers significantly. So this is a picture of the current forecast. This is what this is a summary of what I will be recommending later in my portion of the agenda for approval. The line that I always want to point out is right there in the middle. It's the annual surplus or deficit. I want to point out that we will have a deficit spending starting next year. We did expect a deficit this year. We have a slight positive, which is a good thing, and we'll talk about how we got there in a few minutes. But this is the most important line in the forecast, and I want to make sure that we're always watching that. And as we go, notice that number, that deficit, continues to get larger. So throughout the slides that I've got for you today, dotted lines here represent November, and solid lines represent our estimates for now. These are May forecast numbers. So in November, I really go through every line and point out what's assumed in there, what kinds of revenues are in that line, what kinds of expenditures are in that line. This is really just an update to November, so I'm really going to focus mainly on what's changed since November. So the first thing I want to point is that look at 2020 there. You can see with the dotted lines, we were expecting our expenditures to be exceeding our revenues. In November, that's what we thought was going to happen. And now we do have a slight positive. We have a slight surplus. So the blue line, that solid blue line is higher than the solid orange line. That just means we have more revenue coming in than we're expending this year, slightly, but you'll see that quickly changes moving into next year. We'll talk about a little bit more detail here. Again, focusing on that spending deficit, this slide just represents trying to demonstrate that deficit continues to get larger. The vertical axis on this slide is inverted. So when you're looking at this, the line is going up because the deficit is going up, not because numbers are going up, but the deficit is increasing. So I'm going to start talking with revenue first. The lines on this graph here, this is exactly what I presented to you just 2 slides ago, just removing the expenditures and just showing you the revenue. Again, the dotted line is what we expected in November. Solid line is what we're expecting now. So you can see we're expecting revenues to go down significantly next year, and we'll talk about that in each of these lines, and I'll explain what's going into all of these changes. First line is our general property tax. This is our largest source of revenue. We know that. We talk about that every time we bring this up. You can see that this year our tax revenues were higher than we expected. Couple things playing into this. Our valuation for 2019 was higher than what I had modeled in November. Those final valuations don't come in until December, so in November we didn't have those final numbers. Valuation was higher. And I know you're thinking, but Ashley, you tell me that House Bill 920 tells me increased valuation does not equal increased revenue. That is correct, and that's still true, except when the increased valuation comes from new construction. And we had significant new construction in 19. So that did increase our tax collections, which is a really good thing. In addition, we had higher delinquencies than what we had accounted for, which is a good thing. And those are really hard to predict. Typically, when you have a year of high delinquency collections, then in the following year, your delinquency collections are going to go down. So that's partially contributing to that decline in 2021 that you see there that we're expecting. The other portion of that is, given everything that's going on with COVID-19 affecting our economy, our tax collections will go down. So collection rates are now expected to be much lower than what we were expecting back in November. That's why that's going down. And then as the economy hopefully picks up slowly, we do see some increases in those collections going forward. Next line is public utility personal property. These are tax collections as well. Not a whole lot of change here that we're expecting, not much difference between November to now. All right, so this is a big one. Unrestricted grants and aid. This is our state revenue. Most of this is our foundation funding that comes directly from the state. So you can see that we expect the same trend as we did in May. That uptick from 2020 to 2021 is, if you recall, we had an error that was fairly large that occurred in the previous year. I had to make an adjustment. So this year is artificially deflated. Revenue was recorded in 19 in this fund that should not have been recorded in this fund. So I had to make that adjustment. So that's why you see that dip in 2020. The difference between the May expectation and the November expectation is due to the governor's reduction of our foundation funding. So I know I've covered this a couple times. Our difference is $533,732. So that's a very large percentage of our state revenue for us. It's over 30%. The range across the state, some districts received less than 1% cut, and ours is more than 30. So, you know, the inequity of the level of cuts from a percentage basis is a conversation that's going on around the state. There's a lot of advocacy going on in Columbus. I know a lot of people are really trying to bring this to their attention. I know Senator Dolan has done a lot of work for us, which we really appreciate. But as of right now, we have heard nothing about where that's going to go. So right now, we are still expecting to experience that $500,000 cut. Moving into subsequent years in 2021 and through the rest of the forecast, I have it modeled that we will experience the same cut and we will experience the same level of funding. I have received no reliable information on whether or not that's going to happen. There are people talking, you know, expect more cuts than this year. There are people talking, you know, expect some relief. So really it's anybody's guess at this point. And until the state gives us some indication of what's going to happen with our state funding, my best guess is just to keep our level of funding from this year and keep it flat for the life of the forecast.
Actually, I just wanted to chime in, and maybe Mary Kay and Bob can speak to this. When's the last time the state increased the funding to our school district?
It's a good question.
I have a feeling once they've taken it away, it's very unlikely for us to get any of those funds back.
Right. And as you know, as we continue with this, and you know, the state's not collecting their taxes right now, which is the problem. So they have to balance their budget. K-12 education is one of the largest, if not maybe the largest, expenditure line item that they have. So, you know, it is what it is. We've done what we can. We have made our voices heard. I know Dr. Hunt wrote a letter. I wrote a letter. I know several other, treasurers, superintendents, board members who have done the same, trying to get the point across that these cuts are devastating to districts like us. But as of right now, the cut stands.
I think you said this at our last meeting, but it's equivalent to about $1 million in our tax collections.
Almost, yeah.
It's pretty significant.
Yeah.
And then it must be borne by somebody, either, tightening our belt even more than we already have, or going back to our taxpayers and asking for their support.
Yeah. I've been on several calls with several treasurers and superintendents, different people from ODE. I was on a call this morning, and the explanation is that districts with the smaller percentage have less capacity to raise taxes. Their state revenue makes up a larger portion of their funding, so they rely on it more than districts like us. There's some philosophy there to be debated, certainly, but that's how they came to the differences. Any questions or comments on that? Okay. All right, so moving on to line 1.04, restricted grants and aid. This is also money that comes from the state. The majority of this line is catastrophic cost funding. We've not yet received our amount, so I couldn't change the estimate. This one's kind of hard to predict because the way they calculate the catastrophic cost is we submit for situations that cost us money over a certain threshold. Every district submits, and then they determine a percentage of your total based on the entire state. So even if we can predict what our catastrophic costs are for our district, it depends on every district in the state as well. I would not be surprised if this one came back lower than expected, just because, given what the state is facing with their funding, and how, they're trying to reduce their expenses as well. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a lower percentage than it has been in the past, but, again, there's not really a whole lot to go on to estimate that. Property tax allocation, this is our homestead and rollback monies. Nothing really significant, no significant changes from our November estimates. Line 1.06, this line looks somewhat erratic here. The decrease that you're seeing there in the solid line, which is our current estimates, the decrease in the 2021 is what we're expecting is a decrease in revenue for kindergarten tuition. So depending on what happens with our education model, which I think we've demonstrated is very up in the air, there may not be there likely will not be a full day kindergarten situation where we're charging tuition. If that is the case, then we're not going to bring in that revenue. You see it go back up in 2022 because I am hopeful that by 2022 we will be back to more of a normal situation. Overall, it decreases from 22 on. That's as our cash balance decreases. Interest income is in this line. As our cash balance decreases, our interest income is going to decrease. And the higher overall, I forgot to point this out, our higher overall for this year, for 2020, we did bring in more than we expected. And that's because excess costs, we're filing for excess costs, and we hadn't received the excess costs in the past. So that's why overall we do expect a little bit more continued, and we do expect that to go forward because we will continue to file for that. Okay. Moving on to other financing sources. that one looks like I just made a mistake in the graph. I did not. We received much more this year. That is because we received about $120,000 from the BWC. I know I put this in a board report a few weeks ago that they are giving a dividend. It's meant to be, it's in response to COVID-19, and it's meant to be a relief to employers. That's a one-time thing. We're not going to get that going forward, but it's a great thing and certainly helped us out this year and contributes to that revenue being higher than what we had expected.
Where's that from again?
Workers' Comp, Bureau of Workers' Comp.
Okay, BWC.
I know, I speak in acronyms, I apologize.
BDC, I'm like, really?
No, workers' compensation.
Right.
Okay, any questions on revenues before I move on to expenditures? So overall this year we received more than we expected. Most of that is due to tax collections, but we expect revenues in that area to go down is the biggest takeaway from the revenues is our collections are going to go down. That's our largest source of revenue. All right, moving on to expenditures. This is total expenditures and other uses. You'll see the trend is the same. The line looks almost identical to what it did in November. It's just lower now. And that is several reasons. First line, 3.01 is personnel services. This is our salaries. We do expect, or we've already implemented several items, and we've talked about these, I think, at length at several meetings, that we've already put into place. Decisions have already been made. These are things that we've done through attrition. And we do continue, those are savings, obviously continuing to go forward. This year looks like the same level of cuts. This is not the same reductions for this year. I know it looks like it is because the distance between those two lines is the same. But this year's is due mostly to reduced usage of substitutes for, when COVID-19 happened and teachers were teaching from home. We didn't have as many substitutes. We didn't have to incur that expense. Overtime expense is down. Extra trips for transportation and all those things I know we've covered a couple times. So it does look like the same reduction from 2020 and then 21 going forward. It's not. 2020 is, the one-time kind of reductions that happened this year. 2021 and forward is the reductions that we made a conscious decision to implement. Next line item is employee benefits, 3.02. Benefits were lower this year than we had expected back in November. Couple things playing into this. Part of it, lower payroll equals lower benefits because we have retirement, workers' compensation, Medicare. Those are all a function of payroll. They're a percentage of payroll. So when payroll expenditures go down, then the benefits expenditures go down. The workers' compensation rate for this year came in lower than what I had modeled back in November. So that's playing into that as well. We do expect, expenditures to obviously continue to increase. Should we implement self-insurance, hopefully this line will look different going forward. Purchase services, line 3.03, slightly lower than expected this year. Some of that is the utility savings that we had, reduced, travel, those kinds of things, just minor, not a ton there. I know in November when we talked about purchase services, there was, I always like to point out and make the comment that a lot of this line is out of our control, because when we start talking cost reduction and cost avoidance and things like that, this is one of the lines that people want to hit. And I always make the point that, a lot of the money in this line is out of our control. These are things that we cannot cut. And somebody asked at that point what percentage of it was, and I didn't have those numbers. I did run some numbers this morning, though. 29% of our expenditures in this line were for special education and tuition situations, which we can't cut. Those are mandated. 16% of this is utilities, so we do have some slight control, but it's not like we can make a cut. Another 2% is foundation deductions, additional foundation deductions in addition to the 29% that are special education items. These are things like open enrollment out, which for us is very low, but community schools, CCP charges, things like that. So, roughly, close to half is completely out of our control, and we can't touch those expenditures.
Ashley, sorry, I have a question on, I was just noticing in the full report, I don't think this one shows the historical. It looked like it was growing.
Yes.
The trend was really growing, and you've really flattened out the growth curve. I'm not sure if what you just described speaks to that.
I would really have to look at the history. I see what you're looking at now. I just pulled that up. From 2015 up through 2019. Yeah, from 16 to 17, there was a very large increase. I don't know if there was a big increase in special education situations. That would be my guess. But yeah, without looking, I wouldn't know for sure. But yeah, I mean, we don't expect that to continue to go up exponentially. But again, if something happens, couple situations come into our district and it's tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars very quickly. Did that answer your question or just create more? Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. All right, so moving on to supplies, line 3.04. This line is lower than what we had expected in 2020. A portion of that is due to, just general supplies as a result of COVID-19. We're not in the buildings. We're not using the supplies that we would have been using. Another portion of that is, just really responsible spending by our staff. I really give them credit. They really took it in stride when we went to the new requisition system, and I was able to return stuff within a day and say, hey, could you look into this and see if there's somewhere else that you could find? And then they started to just send me with the requisition, hey, I already looked here, here, and here. So, they're really doing their part to find the best deal for the district and for our taxpayers. So I commend them. Also playing into this is the fuel savings. A large portion of this expenditure is fuel for our buses. Not running the buses for the end of the school year made a difference in that line as well. We do expect lower expenditures than we did in November for the rest of the forecast. You can see the variance is not quite as large between the May and the November expectations going forward, but I do expect it to be lower, and that is because all of the building and departmental budgets we are holding flat. So I think they were over budgeted this year. So in the forecast is what we had budgeted, but we spent much less than that. So holding all of those flat to our current level of spending, not our this year's level of budgeting. So, that's going to result in some savings for us, and I don't think that will be too painful. Expenditures for capital outlay. These are equipment items. Not a ton of difference. This is one of the lines where our expenditures this year were actually a little higher than what we had anticipated in November. But overall, the numbers are very consistent with what we expected in November. And other expenditures, line 4.3, this is, the number is exactly the same. So there are actually two lines there. I know you can't see them, but they are there. But no change from our expectation in November. Transfers out, again, there are actually two lines there. You can't see them because the expectation has not changed from November. The decrease there from 20 to 21 is the transfer out to the PI fund. 21 is going to be the first year full collection on the inside millage that you moved. So you won't need to transfer as much to get to the 2 million level that has been established. This is the graph that I always like to close with on the forecast summary, because I think it really demonstrates our financial picture. The blue bars there are our revenue, the orange is our expenditures. So you can see starting with 21, we do expect to exceed our revenue with our expenditures. So we are going to have a spending deficit there, our revenue deficit. As that bar exceeds and that deficit gets larger, that green line there continues to go down. That's our cash balance. The yellow line there is our cash balance policy, which is 2 months of operating expenditures. That's our absolute minimum. I would not wait. I would not be doing my job if I didn't come to you until 2022 and say, hey, we have a problem. We see it coming and we have to react now, which, I know you're all very well aware, as we've had several conversations about how to address it. But there it is. And that's what it looks like. So if there aren't any questions, I think that's probably a good segue into our next item on the agenda, which is levy and scenario and cut discussion. Any questions on the forecast? Or
I just want to echo some of the discussion we had in the Finance Committee about the large degree of uncertainty. These forecasts are tough enough to do, and you're using educated guesses and historical information to make some projections, but in this environment, it's very, very difficult. And you touched on, several points where we could have greater than expected expenditures in the future, not so far away future, and also reduced revenues, due to the down economy. And I think that's more than any forecast, certainly that I've seen as a board member. This is one that is concerning from that regard, because I think the risks could be very serious to our ability to continue to operate.
Yeah, this is the most uncertain time certainly I've seen. I think everybody would agree. And financially, yeah, the level of uncertainty and the swing that could occur in both directions is, yeah, it makes me uncomfortable. I'm not presenting these numbers to you today saying this is what's going to happen. It's my best guess.
If you did say that, I'd question your sanity. and can you remind me, what was the percent of collections in this forecast that you just showed us?
So for this year, we actually collected more than 100%, which is why our revenues this year were higher. Hold on, I'm pulling up. I have the detail. So our overall collection rates going forward, we're estimating around 98. That's overall. So the overall collection rate is our current collection rate plus our delinquencies. So the current collection rates, what I did was went back to 2007 and 2008 ranges. That's, our best guess on what it's going to look like and how the economy impacts our taxpayers. Those were, I don't have it in front of me, but I can pull it up. For 21, I believe I forecasted 95.5. Hold on one second. Let me swing around here so I can see this other screen.
That's what
Yeah,
my
I'm sorry.
My notes say 95.5.
Yeah, 95.5 for next year. And then going up slightly, 96 to the following year, and then 96.5. And, you know, as the economy hopefully picks up, we do expect, you know, collections then to pick up. So the rates that you see in the table, if you're looking at the actual forecast report, that's total collection. So that includes the delinquencies added into there.
Gotcha. Oh, so okay. So 95 next year, and then 98 the years following that.
No. The 95 next year is 95.5 is the current collections.
Yeah.
Then you add in the delinquent into that. So that's collections on the current levied taxes. Then you add in the delinquencies, and you get an overall collection rate of 98.
Okay, for next year or the years following next year?
Hold on, I have to pull that report back up. So next year's overall is 98. Following year's 98.4. The year after that it's 98.8, and then 98.8 again. Now, to keep that in perspective, this year we collected more than 100. So that, you know, that's a 2% drop. Pretty big when you're talking millions of dollars.
And even so, historically, when you look back at like the 97, 98 time frame, and I don't know if you even went back to, I'm trying to think of the last time, economic crisis. So
I didn't go back to 97, 98. I went back to 07.
I'm sorry, 07.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, 07, 08.
Yeah, our collection rates for 07 and 08 it was 95.5, and then it went up slightly and kind of continued to increase as as the economy recovered.
And that was the current year, or that was the overall?
That was current collections. So I tried to model current collections to current collections. I tried to mirror what happened back then.
Okay, that's a reasonable guess. Yeah. And so you get over 100 if the previous year delinquencies, you know, if they end up, okay, in the following year, I paid my current year taxes plus last year's taxes, because, you know, obviously they can't sell their, you know,
right.
They can't sell their house unless they get the county's lien off of it with the property taxes. I mean, I believe that's what happens.
Right.
Okay. Actually, can you recap then are you assuming the delinquency collections are going to go down? I know you said when we have an up year, it tends to go down, you know.
Right. So that one's kind of like, yeah, it kind of zigzags. I can tell you what I've got modeled in.
That's not a huge piece of the revenue projection. It's that 95.5 that's the biggest chunk.
Right. That's the large chunk. You know, to give you an idea, first half delinquency payments that we just collected was $547,000. I've got it going down to $375 in the 400 range going forward.
Sorry to drill you on that, but it's such a big driver of.
Yeah. That's actually the nice thing about the Zoom calls is I can have my big monitors right here in front of me and I can answer your questions. I don't have to say, I'll get back to you. I have it right here. I'll look it up.
Obviously, people's inability to pay their property taxes could have a huge impact on our ability to function.
Right.
So we'll keep a close eye on that with the economy. Okay. That's it for my questions. I think
we just got a text from Mary Kay that she got kicked out of the meeting, I think.
Hold on, I think I just admitted her.
Okay. I saw her photo pop off, but. There we go. Hi, we missed you.
Sorry.
You're on mute, but we're going to move on to the levy discussion, I think.
All right, I don't know what happened. The internet went out. And
Wow.
That happens.
Okay, so taking that declining green line from that last graph into consideration, we need to do something, and I know we're all well aware of that. I think the last Friday were the most recent scenarios, which took the kindergarten revenue out for 21. Beyond that, I have not made any changes or run any additional scenarios. I've not had any additional requests. So I guess I will put it to the board and see how you're feeling since the last board meeting.
And just as a reminder, we had that board finance and budget committee meeting, and we're able to hear from several of our community members who are experts in different areas. Sorry, that's my dog barking at everybody who walks by. And the board was able to attend that meeting, the entire board. So I know that I've reflected a lot on some of the things that were brought up. Why don't we kind of revisit that if anybody has a different perspective or any additional questions after having gone through those discussions in the finance meeting.
well, I'm sorry, but I've got another message that my internet connection is unstable, so I'm not sure how much I'm going to be able to participate here.
Mary Kay, I've actually received that message a few times in Zoom meetings, and it didn't kick me out immediately.
Okay.
Hopefully it'll hold.
So what were we talking about?
The scenarios, how everybody is feeling about millage, and timing. I think the last conversations that we had, scenarios were 3.85 in the fall to leverage the 3.85 that's falling off. So that would result in tax bills remaining the same. And then there was discussion of waiting until spring, going on the levy or going on the ballot in the spring. Obviously, the need would then be higher. You would need to go for higher millage. I think 7.9 was the discussion. But I do have, I have spreadsheets in front of me, so I can kind of run any scenario if there's anything additional that people want to see or hear about, and see what kind of level of cuts would be needed. We discussed the 3.85 in the fall. To get that to stretch 3 years, we would need about $650,000 in savings to get that to stretch 3 years. So we would need to make cuts of $650,000. That's in addition to the 350 that we've already taken advantage of.
That's a lot of money. I think we could attempt to get there, but there are just so many unknowns that I would be worried about. So yeah. I would propose that we do a 3.85 mill levy in the fall, but I would not to capture the no additional taxes, and hope that it can go 3 years, but just promise that it will go 2. Because there are just so many uncertainties. We don't know what's going to happen.
Right. I should have prefaced this conversation with scenarios that we have and scenarios we've talked about. Take the totals from the forecast. So, the same disclaimer on all of this as we apply to the forecast applies. If something changes, or, if the state cuts our revenue more, or, I can't even think. I don't even want to try to think of what could happen because in 2020 it may. But if something were to significantly change and change this, you know, me sitting here telling you today that you need $650,000 in cuts to get 3 years could quickly become 750 or 850, or, you know, it could get better. I don't know, unfortunately.
No, and I mean, 6 months ago, you know, when we were discussing the levy, I mean, we were talking what we really needed. We were doing numbers like 9.9 mils, 8.9 mils, and we said, no, that's too much to ask, too much to ask. We really felt we couldn't go past 7.9, and now you cut that in half.
Yeah, and to be clear, you know, that need was real. That need is still
right.
Real.
Absolutely.
It's just we have to get there, and I think we acknowledge we have to get there in a different manner now. That was, you know, without cutting expenditures significantly. That was what we needed to maintain our level of programming, and now we know that, you know, maybe that's not going to happen. So we need to look at reducing expenditures as well as increasing revenue.
I thought before we lost the 500,000 from the state, I thought 3.85 was doable. I thought we can make it work. I thought we can make it work for 3 years. Right now, with what I've seen of like how we would have to cut $650,000 from the budget, I think it would be extremely tight. I think it would affect programming. I think it would change some programming for the worse, if not much worse, in a district. So if we can't find other ways of cutting money where I don't think it's going to affect the programming significantly, then I think we would need to ask for a little more than 3.85. I think we could go up to 4.85 to basically replace the money we lost from the state, but we might even be able to split that to, like, you know, 4.2 or 3? Did I do that math? Maybe 4.3 mils or something to split that cost with the community of what we lost from the state. Even that, I think, would help us a lot in keeping the programming at the level we would like it, and let the community vote on whether they want to keep the programming where we at it.
The timing really follows the decision, or the millage amount really follows a decision of timing, because if it's in the fall, then we're saying we all would really like the idea of 3.85 because it keeps the tax dollars the same, but we might need to, but I'm hearing people say we might need to ask for more, or we might need to talk about whether that's a commitment of 2 years or 3 years. But if we go in the spring, then we're looking at 7.9, which increases the amount we collect over the next few years and really makes a big difference in terms of the revenue we're bringing in this cycle. So where I'm at right now is I really would like to understand what an election in November looks like. And I know we talked about bringing in some experts in you know, the political environment, and possibly specific to the educational field within the political environment. I feel like we need to have that conversation really before we can take this one much further. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be very interested to listen to the, the folks with more political expertise than myself, for sure, because that's a big unknown for me, kind of, you know, financially and economically. I'm concerned about letting the 3.85, you know, go, you know, kind of come off property taxes, and then for us to have to put something back on. Although I don't know if just delaying by 6 months affects it at all, but I don't know where my head's at. It's like I think the economy is going to take. I think it's going to recover, but I think it's going to take a little while. It's not. I don't think we're going to know that much more by the spring, unfortunately. So my mind is kind of at the 3.85 plus some austerity measures to cut back some spending.
I think what stuck with me was the uncertainty, coming out of the finance committee meeting, and we've seen more of that recently. And the uncertainty can work both ways. There may be some things that happen that kind of improve our situation. I would never recommend 2 years on something, but we're in a time of such instability and such unknown. I agree with Phil that I don't know that we're going to have more known in spring in terms of the economy and where we're at and our ability to pass it, and we lose that ability to kind of go for something that's not an additional tax and get 2 years out away from this and hopefully answer some of the questions and hopefully have better economic times. I think that's where I keep coming back to personally.
I will say I have the concern, and again, I don't think we're going to decide this tonight, but I have a concern of 2 years that you're kicking the can down the road and making an extremely difficult levy to pass in 2 years. The taxpayers are going to feel like the district came to them asking for new taxes 3 times in the course of 8 years, which is more than what they've historically seen. I really think we need to do what we need to do to get to 3 years. And I feel like we've had some conversations. We're on the right path. I think that, so.
I would love to get to 3 years. I just don't think we can promise that. I mean, if some of these other things happen, then I don't want to promise 3 years and then have to come back in 2 and say, we need to be back sooner. So I would be much more comfortable promising 2 and stretching it to 3.
Well, Ashley, correct me if I'm wrong, but the 650 number we have to make whether we're at 2 or 3 at this point, right? I mean, that needs to happen this year and next year regardless.
If you wanted 3.85 and you only wanted it to last 2 years, I mean, depends on how low, you want your cash balance to get. I think you could do it with less. You still have to make cuts. I mean, I'm not going to tell you can do 3.85 and do nothing. There's still going to need to be some cuts, but it's not going to be that high. For example, if you did 3.85 in November and cut 450, that would be about 2.
Yeah, but see, now you're planning on 2, and then in the event that something else happens that's unpredicted and we're unprepared for, I think we need to continue to plan for 3. How we message that to the community can be part of the levy strategy conversation. I think that we have witnessed this year that there is an uncertainty and an exposure in public education that none of us anticipated, and that the coronavirus has really changed that dynamic. So, I don't know that any length of a levy cycle is a commitment that we can make 100% anyway, but I still think it's important that we plan for 3.
I think cutting 650 is seriously going to affect the school. And I'd want the community to vote on keeping the school as close to the same as we can before we actually start really changing the school that much. So that's why I mean, whether you want it 2 or 3 years, I think you cutting $650,000 from what I've seen is not something that's realistic based on what I've seen needs to be cut. So I think the fall's a much better. I mean, I'll hear from the experts So I'll defer to them eventually. But I think we want an election where more people are going to turn out. I think that's good for us. I think the fall's good. I would much rather go something like 4-8 in the fall than 7-8 in the spring. I think that 4-8 in the fall is much more likely to pass than a 7.8 or 9 in the spring. So again, I would defer to the political experts though on that. But
yeah, I think that you're coming back to the same point Sharon made, that timing is really relevant to the decision about the millage, and some input on palatability too, of where we think the voters might be able to absorb. How big of an advantage is it to say your taxes won't go up versus being in a crowded, very noisy, uncertain time this fall, with, I think, as I've said before, great difficulty in getting your message out to people that it even isn't a tax increase for them. That the whole campaign that we're talking about kind of hinges on that message being understood. So, so I agree. And then I just wanted to recap, I think several members of the Finance Committee who weighed in, what I heard coming out of that was similar to what Bob kind of said, which is there's a lot of uncertainty. And when you have great uncertainty in your assumptions, you don't want to have too tight of a forecast because of all of those risks. And so you need to either increase your revenues or increase your expense cutting. One of those two things needs to happen. So I'm kind of in that boat myself. I'm not comfortable with what we've seen so far. And I'm not even sure I'm comfortable that $650,000 gets us a 3-year cycle with all of the risks and uncertainties in there. So maybe where we're at is to bring Anthony in at the next meeting and begin the discussion about what the political environment might look like, and see if that gives us any new things to think about.
The other thing that might be helpful to understand, and I don't know where we are on this, but who will be running the levy committee and what a strategy looks like in a world where you can't go door to door and you can't have coffees in homes and you can't have VIP meetings. That might play a role in my decision making as well. I think we need a social media campaign that is different from anything we've seen before. And I would love to understand how the levy committee is going to successfully market this in November if we decide to go in November. So Bob, where are we on identifying people to run that?
Yeah, I think I've said this before. I have a list of people, but it's hard to recruit people when you don't know what you're asking them to do. I think we need to make a decision on what our millage is, what our ask is, and when we're going before I approach people. I mean, I have a list of people that I will reach out to, but until I know what we're actually asking, it makes it a very difficult conversation. What are we asking of them and when?
Well, from the Finance Committee meeting, from the community members there, I think we have a few people there who could be on a levy committee. I think people were quite positive that despite the down economy, they were pleased with how Chagrin Falls Schools has been acting, and we're feeling, in their opinion, the community would be supportive of a levy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just know that it can take time to get certainly leaders in place. Typically, people are willing to step up and volunteer, but having the bandwidth to be a leader of the levy committee in the fall or the spring, now is the time when parents are starting to sign up for PTO assignments and leadership assignments in our support organizations. And I think it would be good to put it on, if there are people that you have in mind, to put it on their radar and let them know the timing. I don't know I don't know that the millage amount that we're asking for would be as important as I understand that whether it's the fall or the spring is important, but maybe just having the conversation and letting them know that it's approaching.
So we may have a lot more information at that June 3rd meeting. So why don't we see where we get on that, if we can, hone in on the timing. And then, I understand what Bob is saying. It's, if you were to ask me, it would make a big difference whether it was the fall or the spring, for whether I would be able to help out. So, I think we're doing the right thing here. We're asking the tough questions. We're analyzing and rethinking and double checking and bringing in as many experts as we can. And I think the next piece is that, and actually, Sharon, to the point of strategy, we may hear from Anthony advice about how you would undertake a campaign in this type of an environment and what that would look like. We maybe will want to prepare some questions for him about, what does the committee look like? How much lead time do we need? What type of budget? I'm assuming there might be quite a large budget for a campaign like this, because you have to get information to people in a really different way than what we have traditionally. And remember, we have a lot of people, I say maybe even half of our voters, who don't have computers and aren't checking in on Facebook and tweets and that type of thing. So if we're comfortable with it, I'd like to get some more information before we recruit too heavily. And then, really, once we do that, once we really figure out whether it's fall or spring, so many different things happen with regard to the amount of cuts that we have to make and a lot of different things. So I haven't chimed in. I wanted to really hear what you guys had to say. My thinking hasn't really changed. In fact, I feel even more strongly that we should be going out in the spring and asking for what we need. And I think we can make a case for it. I think it has less cuts required. It has much less risk to our forecast. It means a 4-year cycle. It all really hinges on whether or not the voters would support it.
What's the difference between doing 7-9 in the spring and 7-9 in the fall? You think the fall's less likely to pass?
I have concerns. I differ in the assessment of large voter turnout being helpful. I think that I'm concerned about the fall election for a lot of reasons. One is because it's a presidential election, and one that's going to have a lot of noise in the arena. I think that when you have highly uncertain economic times, people tend to vote no on new taxes, which we know for certain is happening this fall. In the spring, it might be continuing. It might not. It may be continuing. It may not. So, I think we can make a stronger case in the spring, let things kind of settle down. We'll have more information. To Bob's point, we'll have a lot more information about what education is looking like, what our cost savings realized or additional expenditures might be. We'll have 1 more year of information. I think, but for me, the driving factor is that the revenues that we receive over the 4-year cycle are so much greater, and it avoids an election that I think is going to be very problematic as far as getting any airtime to get your point across to people that it's not a tax increase, or not a tax increase to their tax bills. But I could be persuaded. I'm not an expert in this. So I think it's really great that we're bringing somebody in to talk to us, maybe a couple people.
Yeah, when you can't go door to door, the simple fact that people are going to be paying attention to politics in the fall means you're going to be able to get your message out, I think, easier. I think in the spring, you'll really struggle to get it out in the winter when there's nothing else going on. So the fact that people are paying attention to politics and paying attention to an election in the fall, when you can't go door to door and you can't meet, I feel is a much better time to go out.
And you might be right. I think we should definitely put that
again,
because, are they just going to want to talk about the presidential election? Are they going to be receptive? Are they going to be so sick of it that, remember the last one? I wouldn't even look at anything. I got so tired of all of the emotion in the election. So
I think when we're talking the presidential election, though, I think most people know now how they're going to vote in that. I mean, we are so divided, as a society. I think there are very few people that are like really paying attention to, the ads and all that kind of stuff. That I don't think that's going to detract from their headspace in it. Also, I just want to remind everybody that 7.9 in the spring does not come without cuts. I mean, we're still talking $500,000 cuts starting next year. And we would need to implement those before that levy because we can't let a whole nother year go by without making those cuts. Because then the cuts are even greater, even with the 7.9.
If we didn't have the 3.85 falling off, I would imagine we would be looking to go out in the spring and ask for 7.9 or be having the conversation of where we were, which is go out in the fall and ask for 7.9. So, the whole environment has changed since we started these conversations, and the 3.85 falling off was such an important part of where we started. I just want to make sure that we don't let that weigh in too heavily on where we take this now. So I think, is that it for today on the levy conversation?
Well, I would just like to finish up with that. I mean, we have this unique opportunity that 3.85 mils is falling off. It's falling off in the end of this year. If the levy fails, you can come right back. You can say, this is what we're asking. If not, we got to come back even greater next year.
No, I know. I agree. I think it's a great thing. I mean, the truth of the matter is it falls off and it stays off. So it's off in the spring as well.
Right, but people's taxes already went down. And then they have to go back up. That's a lot harder pill to swallow.
I'm concerned. Yeah, I'm very concerned that we don't want to miss that chance. I mean, I hate to say it this way, but we don't want to let them go down. We want to at least keep them the same. Well, so it sounds like, we've got a variety of opinions. We're all still gathering some data, including have a few political experts to give us some different opinions, hopefully this next meeting. So, I mean, unless there's more, insightful decisions now or discussion now, maybe we hold it off until the next meeting at this point. But let's all try to get our minds around getting to a decision point next meeting. Does that sound fair? Zeus is really excited about this levy discussion. All right, you finished, Ms. Bruno?
That concludes my portion of the agenda.
All right, fantastic. Right, so next we are on to the audience community participation. Dr. Hunt, Mrs. Bruno, did you get any requests for?
I have not.
I did not.
Okay, neither did I. So we'll move on, but I would encourage if anybody does want to participate, in a future meeting to let Dr. Hunt, Mrs. Bruno, or myself know at the email addresses published on the school website. All right, next we will go to consent agenda items. Can I have a motion for consent agenda item 7A through 7D?
So moved.
And
I'll second.
All right.
Oh, wait. What? Who was the motion?
Mary Kay.
Okay, thank you. And Catherine, you seconded?
I seconded. Hey, Phil, you might want to adopt that strategy of restating because I think sometimes on Zoom it's hard for Ashley to to hear it.
Sure. Okay. Okay. Is there any discussion? All right, Mrs. Brudno, if you'd please take the roll.
Mr. Rankin,
Yes.
Mr. Kanziger,
Yes.
Mrs. Burrows,
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
All right. Moving on, if I could have a motion for superintendent's recommendations 8A through 8K.
So moved.
All right. Mr. Kanzinger has the motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
All right. Mrs. O'Toole has it. Dr. Hunt, would you like to discuss any of these?
Sure. Just quickly, item A, I'd like to thank Lee Johns for his service to the school district. Lee is a exceptional retired teacher, math teacher, who came back to serve as an educational aide in our building. And you talk about somebody who always comes to work with a positive attitude, developed a lot of deep relationships, and we're going to be sad to see him go. So I want to thank Lee for his service to the district. Item B is a recommendation to improve Samantha Hamilton. We've included her resume there for you to review. She went through, I believe, 4 rounds of interviews, including students, faculty, and administration. And she really surfaced as a positive candidate. So we're recommending her for the high school guidance position. Item C is a recommendation, and D is a recommendation for preschool and full day kindergarten tuition. As Mrs. Bruno mentioned, I recommended that she back out kindergarten tuition for next year. We're going to inform parents of that. I guess just for the board's information, I don't see an option right now if we were to return in with social distancing restrictions in which we would differentiate between full and half day. And I don't think it's fair to try to charge our parents for that. We will communicate that we are not collecting tuition. However, if we were to return to more traditional normal school where that delineation did exist, we would intend to prorate tuition based on that. So if we came back in January, we'd prorate from there. So that's why I'm asking you to approve at least the amount now, but that's our intention in terms of implementation. Item E is a memorandum of understanding regarding spring supplementals. Appreciate Mrs. Sayer's work and collaboration on getting to an agreement with that. Item F is a resolution for the work stoppage for non-teaching supplemental positions. Item G is specific to the 3rd grade reading assessment. We like to give that in written format. We have that option, but the board has to approve the resolution for us to do that. And I would put the caveat if there's testing next fall. Item H is our agreement with LGCA Support Services. Item I is a recommendation to approve a contract with Good City. If that looks familiar, that is the company that did put together the intermediate school video that we rolled out earlier this fall. There was a conversation today about timeline and completion of this video. They recently completed Kenston's graduation. I had a chance to look at some of that, and they just did a phenomenal job. So we are going to move forward with creating a virtual graduation in June here. So that is ready to go. And then if we can't bring students together or parents together in any capacity in July, we would release this. If we are able to bring them together, we will give this to the class of 2020 as a keepsake. And certainly they deserve, something special after all of this. Item J is the annual recommendation to approve our membership with the Alliance. A lot of our work in terms of advocacy at the state level is done through this group. I serve on the executive committee there, and it really provides us an opportunity to have a voice at the table with educational change. Item K is the design portion of the HVAC projects that are anticipated in the FIP. specifically Gurney, the middle school, and the high school for design services. Happy to answer any questions.
I'm here.
So we have a motion and a second.
You.
Yes, we do. Ms. Brudno, if you'd like to take the roll.
Mr. Rankin.
Yes.
Mr. Kanzinger.
Yes.
Mrs. Burrows.
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey.
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
All right, moving on, we have the treasurer's recommendations. Can I have a motion for treasurer's recommendation 9A through 9C?
So moved.
All right, thank you, Mrs. O'Toole. If I could have a second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Kanzinger. If you'd like to address these, Mrs. Brudno.
Thank you. Item A is the 5-year forecast update. I think I have used up my time on this topic. It is attached there. I know you've all probably had a chance to read every single word of every page. Report is the same format as November. It includes all the assumptions there. The actual forecast is in there as well. We do have to file the assumptions as that's part of our requirement. So the entire report would be filed with the state. Item B is the April financial reports. Not a ton to point out here. I know I've kind of hit you with a lot of financial. You're very aware of our financial situation right now. I do want to point out that the general fund summary report, the revised one that I started doing a couple months ago, the revision now includes the new forecasted amounts. So the comparisons are no longer to the November numbers. The comparisons on this are to the current May forecast numbers. And then there was one other thing I wanted to point out. Our Homestead and Rollback from Cuyahoga County normally comes in April. It did not come in April this year. I did not look today, but as of a couple days ago, it still had not arrived. So that's why you'll see a big variance from the April revenue numbers from last year to this year. It's just a timing issue on that. So I don't really have anything else to point out on those unless anybody has any questions. And then item C is donations. We have $200 for a Tiger Perk from the Jones family. This is, they made some glasses with our logo on them. They sold them and then took all the money that they made and donated it to the district, which those glasses were really cool if you got to see those. And then from KMK, they donated 2 boxes of masks at a value of $30. So I am recommending your approval.
Okay, Mrs. Brudno, if you'd please take the roll.
Mr. Rankin.
Yes.
Mr. Kanzinger.
Yes.
Mrs. Burrows.
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey.
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to other business. Does anybody have any other business they would like to discuss at this time?
I do. Mr. Doherty, can you turn your camera on, please? I can't see him. Is he out there?
Yes.
I'd like to congratulate and introduce to the Board of Education the 2020 International Society for Tech Education Tech Coordinator of the Year. This is quite an accomplishment. So,
Wow.
That's great.
Thank you.
Well deserved.
Mike, you're out of breath. Why are you out of breath?
I'm not out of breath. I've been enjoying this meeting.
I texted him about 30 seconds ago and said, you're going to go live. And he's like, well, I might have to go change my shirt. So,
Well done.
Great great accomplishment for Mike. I know, it's a reflection of a ton of work out of his department and our staff as well. But Mike, congratulations. It's great to hear some good news, and board, you'll see kind of a public release of this in the next couple of days. We're going to put something out, but thank you very much, Mike, for all you do. We appreciate you.
Again, thank you. Love to be part of this family.
Awesome. Great job, Mike. And Bob, you said it was an international award?
I can only tell you it's the International Society for Tech Education. So we're going to call it international.
I think you're a global winner, Mike. Awesome. Very well done.
Renowned, they say, right? I just had one other thing. Tomorrow is First Responders Appreciation Day in Chagrin Falls, and wanted to do a shout out to all of our first responders. You are our heroes. Thank you for everything that you do.
Yeah. Absolutely. We all owe them our lives at one point or another, I'm certain. All right. Any other business? All right. Seeing none, the next meeting is Wednesday, June 3rd at 6 p.m. on video conference again. I think, Mr. Kanzinger, if you want to kick us back into executive session.
In accordance with Ohio Revised Code 121.22, the Chagrin Falls Board of Education will go into executive session for the sole purpose of consideration of any of the following matters: compensation of a public employee or official, and preparing for conducting and reviewing negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees considering their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment.
I'll second that.
Okay. Ms. Brudno, if you want to take the roll.
Mr. Rankin.
Yes.
Mr. Kanzinger.
Yes.
Mrs. Brose.
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey.
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
That does not know that we're going back into executive session.
He does now.
Does it require any special? Do we have to go out and come back in again?
No.
I don't think we have to go out. I think Mike can just turn our live stream off.
Let me just stop this